All right, so today we're diving into some pretty unconventional relationship
Yeah,
ideas.
sounds like it.
We're taking a look at Play Your Part, Tribal Love Over Cheaters and Chaos,
Oh, I've heard of this one.
written by Ya Boy Rick.
Hmm.
It's a book that really, well, it kind of throws out the traditional relationship rule book.
Really? In what way?
It basically proposes this whole, like, tribal kingdom dynamic.
Tribal kingdom. Okay,
Okay.
I'm intrigued already.
Yeah, so imagine, like, a king at the center.
Like a literal king.
Well, not like a medieval king, but yeah, in a sense.
Okay.
And surrounding him are multiple women that he calls queens.
So like polygamy.
It's similar, but he really emphasizes this like submission dynamic.
Submission, like the women submit to the man.
Exactly, but he frames it in this way where it's supposedly empowering for the women.
That's an interesting twist on the usual power dynamics we see in relationships.
Right, like it completely flips the script.
So how does he justify
Yeah.
that? Like how is submitting to a man empowering?
Well, he starts by basically trashing monogamy.
Monogamy. Okay.
Yeah, he calls it a weak woman's wish
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
and says it goes against a man's nature.
I can see how that's going to ruffle some feathers.
Oh, for sure. This book is definitely not for everyone.
Yeah, I'm starting to get that impression.
He argues that men are inherently driven to have multiple partners.
I mean, biologically speaking, there's some truth to that.
And then he presents this tribal love model as the solution.
So walk me through this. How does this tribal love thing actually work?
So you have the king who leads
Okay.
and the queens who actively choose to submit to him.
And this is supposed to be empowering for them. How?
Well, he argues they achieve a different kind of power
Different how?
by aligning themselves with a strong leader and contributing to his success.
It's like a power sharing arrangement.
In a way, yeah, but within a very specific hierarchical framework.
So it sounds like traditional gender roles are still very much in play here.
Definitely. And he really emphasizes the queen's role in, like, relieving the king's stress.
Stress. Like what kind of stress?
Everything mental, emotional, even sexual stress.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
It's like she's supposed to be his sanctuary.
Always there to meet his needs.
Exactly.
Sounds like a full-time job.
And it doesn't stop there. He also encourages women to contribute financially to the kingdom.
Oh, so it's not just about fulfilling his personal needs.
Nope. It's about building wealth together, creating multiple streams of income.
So there's an element of financial agency in there for the women.
Right. It's kind of this weird mix of traditional gender roles
Yeah.
and like modern financial independence.
It's like he's trying to have it both ways.
It definitely raises some questions about what his true motivations are.
It's hard to say for sure. Is he really trying to empower women? Or is it just a new spin on an old patriarchal system?
That's a great question, and it gets even more complex when you look at how he tries to justify this whole thing using the Bible.
Really? He brings religion into it.
Oh yeah, he claims this tribal love and submission stuff is actually in line with divine order.
That's a bold move. Using religion to support such a controversial lifestyle.
He's basically saying it's not just acceptable, it's God's plan.
That's going to spark some serious debate, I imagine.
Definitely. And it makes you think about how people use religion to support all sorts of viewpoints, even ones that are really out there.
It's like picking and choosing the parts that fit your narrative.
Right, and it shows how fluid interpretations of religious texts can be.
So we've got this rejection of monogamy, this tribal love idea, and now a religious justification thrown in the mix. This book is already proving to be pretty wild.
Oh yeah, it's definitely not holding back. Anything stand out to you so far?
Well, this whole thing about planting seeds is pretty interesting.
Planting seeds? What's that about?
He encourages the women to introduce other women to this lifestyle.
So it's like they're actively recruiting new queens for the kingdom.
Yeah, it's like building a whole community around these ideas.
So it's not just about individual relationships.
It's about creating a movement, spreading this way of life.
It makes you wonder how many people are actually buying into this.
It's hard to say, but the fact that he's writing a book about it suggests there's at least some audience for these ideas.
Right. People are obviously drawn to this, but for what reasons? That's the big mystery.
And it gets even more interesting when you consider the emphasis he puts on emotional mastery.
Emotional mastery? Like, what do you mean?
He talks a lot about the importance of women controlling their emotions,
Okay.
especially negative ones like jealousy and insecurity.
I can see how that would be important in a dynamic with multiple women.
He sees those emotions as disruptive to the king's leadership.
And to the peace of the kingdom.
Right. It's all about maintaining harmony and stability.
So they're supposed to just suppress their feelings?
Not necessarily suppress, but manage them in a way that doesn't rock the boat.
He even has a whole section on the art of silence.
The art of silence. That sounds a little ominous.
Basically, it's about choosing your words carefully.
Not complaining, focusing on solutions instead.
Exactly. It's about promoting peace, not confrontation.
Which would be a good thing.
Yeah, but it could also lead to some unresolved issues simmering under the surface.
It's like walking a tightrope between maintaining harmony and expressing your true feelings.
And then, of course, we have to talk about sex.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room.
He dedicates a whole chapter to sex as power.
And what's his take on it?
He basically says it's a tool for women to empower themselves and strengthen their bond with the king.
But isn't that contradictory to the whole submission thing?
He frames it as a form of submission, but not in a negative way.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's about fulfilling the king's desires, relieving his stress, and deepening their connection.
It sounds like he's trying to redefine what submission means in this context.
Exactly. And it's definitely a very unconventional perspective on female sexuality and agency.
You could say that again. It's certainly pushing the boundaries of what we consider normal in relationships.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on how he thinks kids should be raised in this dynamic.
Or how blended families are supposed to navigate all of this.
There's a lot more to unpack here. This is a very layered, complex book.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about relationships.
And about society in general. Like, where do we draw the line between individual freedom and collective responsibility?
It's like he's proposing a whole new social order.
And whether you agree with it or not, it's definitely a fascinating thought experiment.
It forces you to confront your own beliefs and biases.
And to consider alternative ways of living and relating to others.
And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. It's not about right or wrong.
It's about expanding our understanding of the human experience.
And all the different ways people choose to navigate the complexities of life and love.
Exactly. And who knows, we might even learn something about ourselves along the way.
That's the beauty of exploring unconventional ideas. They challenge us to think differently.
And to see the world from a new perspective.
So let's keep that open mind as we delve deeper into Play Your Part and see what other surprises Yaboy Rick has in store for us.
I'm ready for the ride.
Me too. Buckle up because it's about to get even more interesting.
Can't wait. So we've talked about the king and his queens, but what about kids? Like,
Yeah.
how do children fit into this whole tribal kingdom thing?
Yeah, that's a big one. And the book actually spends a good chunk of time addressing that.
Because I imagine it gets pretty complicated, especially if the women are coming into this dynamic with kids from previous relationships.
Right, like how do you blend all those different families together under one roof?
And under the leadership of a guy who isn't their biological father.
Exactly. And Yaboy Rick lays out some pretty specific guidelines for handling all of that.
Guidelines. Like, what kind of guidelines?
Well, first and foremost, he says, any children a woman brings with her automatically become part of the kingdom.
So they're essentially adopted by the king.
In a sense, yeah, he becomes their authority figure regardless of biology.
That's a big adjustment for everyone involved.
And he's very clear that the king's authority trumps any outside influence, including that of biological fathers.
So the biological dads are basically out of the picture.
He doesn't say they have to completely disappear, but there are definitely some strict boundaries in place.
I can see how that could lead to some tension.
Oh, for sure. It's a very clear hierarchy, with the king at the top and everyone else falling in line below him.
It's like he's creating a separate society within society with its own rules and power structure.
And that extends to how the kids are educated. He's a big advocate for homeschooling.
Homeschooling. Interesting. Why is that?
He believes traditional schools stifle individuality and promote conformity.
I can see where he's coming from. But it also raises concerns about socialization and exposure to different viewpoints,
That's definitely a valid point. He's basically creating a very controlled environment for these kids.
where their primary influences are the king and his ideology.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining the integrity of the kingdom and passing those values down to the next generation.
And speaking of values, let's circle back to that religious justification he keeps bringing up.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other layer of complexity.
Like, how does he actually reconcile this lifestyle?
Yeah.
with religious beliefs. It seems pretty contradictory on the surface.
Well, he spends a lot of time citing biblical examples and offering his own interpretations of scripture.
It's like he's trying to build a theological case for tribal love.
And submission, don't forget that part.
Right, that too. The bold move, especially considering how many people interpret those texts in a very traditional monogamous way.
It's almost like he's creating his own religious sect with play your part as the holy book.
And he's the prophet leading his followers to the promised land of tribal kingdoms.
It definitely raises a lot of questions about the role of interpretation in religion and how people use faith to support all sorts of unconventional ideas.
And it makes you wonder how much of this is genuine belief and how much is just strategic justification.
Like, is he truly convinced this is God's plan, or is he just trying to give his lifestyle a veneer of legitimacy?
Hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a fascinating example of how personal beliefs and larger social structures collide.
And how people try to reconcile those sometimes conflicting forces in their lives.
So we've got this kind of insular community with kids being raised in a very specific way and a whole religious framework to back it all up. It's quite the system he's built here.
It really is. And it all ties back to that idea of planting seeds, which he emphasizes as a way to grow the movement.
Right, he wants women to actively recruit others to this lifestyle.
It's like a multi-level marketing scheme for tribal love.
But instead of selling products, they're selling a whole way of life.
It's about building a network, a community of like-minded individuals who believe in this vision.
It's almost like he's creating a new social order, a parallel society that operates outside of mainstream norms.
And to function within that society, you need a certain level of emotional control.
Right, he talks a lot about that emotional mastery stuff.
It's not enough to just agree with the ideology. You have to be able to manage your emotions in a way that doesn't disrupt the harmony of the kingdom.
So no jealousy, no drama, no complaining.
Exactly. It's all about presenting a united front, being a source of strength for the king and the community.
It sounds almost robotic, like they're trying to program themselves to feel a certain way.
He would probably say it's about self-discipline and prioritizing the greater good over individual feelings.
It's certainly a very specific way of approaching emotional intelligence.
And it raises some interesting questions about whether it's truly healthy to suppress those negative emotions, or if it just leads to them coming out in other, potentially more destructive ways.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, what are the long-term psychological effects of living in such a controlled environment?
And how sustainable is it to constantly police your own emotions and those of everyone around you?
I guess only time will tell if this tribal love experiment can actually stand the test of real-life challenges and complexities.
Speaking of complexities, we still haven't tackled the sex aspect of all this.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. And from what we've seen so far, I'm guessing Ya Boy Rick doesn't shy away from it.
Not at all. He dives right in with his sex is power philosophy.
Which, if I remember correctly, is all about women using sex to empower themselves and strengthen their bond with the king.
Exactly. It's about fulfilling his desires, relieving his stress, and deepening their connection through physical intimacy.
It's a very unconventional view of female sexuality and agency.
To say the least, and it definitely pushes the boundaries of what most people consider acceptable within a relationship, even a non-monogamous one.
It's like he's taking the whole happy wife, happy life thing to a whole new level.
But with the genders reversed, it's happy king, happy kingdom.
And the queens are responsible for maintaining that happiness in all areas of life, including the bedroom.
It's a lot of pressure, that's for sure. And it raises a ton of questions about power, consent, and exploitation.
Like, are these women truly making free choices, or are they just conforming to the expectations of this system?
And how do you navigate jealousy and insecurity in a dynamic where multiple partners are not only accepted, but encouraged?
It's a lot to unpack, and I'm not sure Ya Boy Rick provides all the answers.
He lays out a framework, a blueprint for how he thinks things should work, but whether it's actually realistic or sustainable in the long run is debatable.
I guess that's up to each individual to decide. If they buy into his vision, maybe it can work for them. But it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution to the complexities of relationships.
And it certainly challenges a lot of our preconceived notions about love, sex, and power.
And about what constitutes a normal or healthy relationship.
So let's keep that in mind as we move into the final part of our deep dive. We're going to explore how Ya Boy Rick envisions this tribal kingdom actually functioning in the real world.
Like, how do you build a legacy, achieve financial abundance, and create a lasting impact using this model? It sounds like quite the ambitious undertaking.
It is. And it's going to force us to confront even more uncomfortable truths about ourselves and society as a whole.
I'm ready for it. Let's
Great.
dive in.
So we've talked about the structure, the rules, all the how-to stuff, but what about the why? Like, what's the supposed upside to all of this? What does Yacht Boy Rick say people actually gain from living this way?
Well, he claims it's not just about, like, satisfying the king or whatever. He believes this whole tribal kingdom thing creates a system where everyone wins, you know.
Everyone. So it's not just the king who benefits.
He argues that the queens benefit too. In fact, he says everyone thrives in this kind of dynamic. It provides a sense of purpose, belonging, a feeling of being part of something bigger than yourself.
Okay, but you could argue that traditional relationships can offer that too, right? Like love, commitment, shared goals.
He'd probably say those are weak imitations compared to what he's proposing.
Hmm.
He paints a picture of this super close-knit community where jealousy and drama are basically non-existent. Everyone understands their role, everyone contributes to a shared vision, and there's this, like, unshakable sense of unity.
It sounds a little too good to be true, doesn't it? Like, can you really eliminate all human conflict just by changing the structure of a relationship?
I think that's the big question mark hanging over this whole thing. It's all very theoretical.
Hmm.
He presents this idealized version of how things could be, but real life is messy. People are complicated. You can't just program human behavior like that.
And what about the kids who are raised in this environment? Like, are they truly happy and well adjusted, or are they just conforming to the expectations of the system?
It's hard to say without actually observing these families in action, but it definitely raises some concerns about individual freedom and autonomy, right? Like, are these kids being given this space to explore their own identities, make their own choices, or are they being molded into these predetermined roles?
It's like that whole nature versus nurture debate. How much of who we are is shaped by our environment, and how much is just hardwired into us from birth?
And then there's the financial aspect. Rick talks a lot about building wealth, creating a legacy that lasts for generations.
He believes that by pooling their resources and working towards common goals, the kingdom can achieve a level of financial stability and abundance that wouldn't be possible for individuals working alone.
It's like a family business, but on a much grander scale. They're not just building a company, they're building a dynasty.
It's definitely a powerful idea, this notion of creating something that outlives you, something that continues to grow and impact the world long after you're gone. You see it throughout history with royal families, powerful business empires, religious movements.
It speaks to this deep-seated human desire to make a mark on the world, to leave behind a legacy that transcends individual mortality.
Whether or not you agree with his messes, you have to admire Ya Boy Rick's ambition. He's not just trying to change relationships, he's trying to change the world.
He's definitely a big thinker, someone who's not afraid to challenge the status quo and propose radical solutions to the problems he sees in society. He wants to upend the way we think about love, family, community, even spirituality.
It's thought-provoking, for sure. Even if you completely disagree with his conclusions, it forces you to engage with these big questions, to re-examine your own beliefs and assumptions.
And I think that's the real value of this book, even if you never intend to live this way yourself. It's a mental workout, a challenge to your preconceptions, a reminder that there are many different ways to approach life and relationships.
And that the solutions that work for some people might not work for others. It's about finding your own path, your own truth, even if it means going against the grain of what society tells you is normal or acceptable.
It's about being open to new ideas, even if they seem strange or uncomfortable at first. You never know where that curiosity might lead you.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Play Your Part, Tribal Love Over Cheaters and Chaos, we want to leave you with this. Whether you find Ya Boy Rick's vision inspiring, outrageous, or somewhere in between, the book serves as a powerful reminder that there's no one right way to live or love.
It's about exploring different possibilities, challenging your own biases, and being open to the diversity of human experience.
And most importantly, it's about having those conversations, engaging in respectful dialogue, and trying to understand perspectives that differ from our own. That's how we grow, that's how we learn, that's how we evolve as individuals and as a society.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a new and fascinating subject. Until then, stay curious.